Hi guys, welcome back. So we're going to continue with our Modix Big 40 build. The next step in our process right now is we're going to be putting in the heated bed, installing that into our Z-axes. I have a little bit of prep work done here ahead of time. I've got the right side extrusion and the rear extrusion put in place. I'm going to install the other two now while we're here so you guys can see what's going on. The first part of this process, or the first part of this, is to use the 90-degree corner braces. We are going to install these on the side of the mid-Z brackets so that they will support the middle extrusion as it's coming across the machine. The difference when you're using these corner brackets over any other bit of extrusion we've used up until this point is you need to use the button head bolts, the button head Allen screws. So when you do these, you have to do these in the corner brackets so that you have enough clearance to be able to get both bolts in. In the mid-axis Z brackets, there are PEM screws or PEM nuts already installed. So we're just going to roughly put this one here in place. It has to be roughly level with the top of the Z bracket here. And similar to what you see that I've done in the rest of this, I'm going to prep this a little bit ahead of time. We're going to put our bolt up through. And I'm going to tighten on the T-nut just a thread. Just one full turn, maybe turn and a half. Our short extrusion is going to be the one that goes side to side. So we're going to slide this in the end of the extrusion on this side. We can slide it across the machine. Engage our T-nut on the opposite side. And at this point, you're really just going to center it. This extrusion doesn't actually touch the extrusion on the outside edges. It's basically going to run from mid-Z bracket to mid-Z bracket, supported by these corner braces. And you're basically going to center the difference once you get the second piece of extrusion in on the left side. So let's get our last bolt, our last Allen bolt, and our T-nut. And let's get that prepped in place here. So now, with a longer piece of extrusion, rotate these T-nuts around so we have lots of space. And we're going to start sliding these through our extrusion on the outside. Once you have your sidebar put in, level it up so that it's flush with the edges of the mid-Z bracket. You can just double check your mid beams, make sure your distance is roughly the same on both ends, and then you can start tightening things down. So I start with the corner bracket at the bottom, push down on the aluminum extrusion, and then tighten it into place. Because at the end of this process, you want to make sure that the top of this extrusion is level with the top of this extrusion. If this bracket's a little high, it will cause this piece of extrusion to be a little high, and that's not what you want in this scenario. So if you need to just loosen that up a little bit, make sure everything is down and straight. You can look across the surface and make sure everything is level. You just want to make sure that everything is even for the next step where we're going to go put our bed on. So now come up under your brackets here. And tighten down these side rails. There we go. All right, so everything here is all bolted in. So the next step, similar to what I've got done in this corner here, we have to install these silver corner brackets in these places. Now the difference really between the black ones and the silver ones have these little registration dimples on them. So once they're in the T-slot, they will only rotate so far. These black ones do not have the registration dimples, so they will bolt flat onto the Z brackets. It's the only difference in these brackets. You just have to keep an eye out that you're using the right ones in the right locations. So when we do these, we'll slide in our T-nuts. Again, we have to use our button top bolts. I put them in the corner bracket first, tie them into the T-nut, slide it into place, hold it square. Snug down the first bolt. Slide our T-nut in, and then we can put our second bolt in. That being done, I have 2 more to do, and then we're ready to go with the bed. All right, so all of our frame now is done. Next step is we're going to lower our bed into place. Now again, same as we left this last time. Control box, I'm not even going to unwrap because at this point we don't need anything open in it. The critical part to this is ensure you drop the control box through the middle of the frame before you put the bed in place. Once you have the bed in, you cannot get that control box to go where it's supposed to be. So remember when I pointed out to you last time, this cable connection for the bed is towards the front. We have exposed aluminum plate here, and on this side it's tight, and now we'll show you why. So when we lay this in, it's going to lay between all of our extrusions. We're going to push this to one side. Now our corners are still sitting down in place where it's pushing this off the side slightly. So I have to adjust this extrusion just a little bit to line up with our 4 holes. And that's okay because little bits of adjustment may be required. So when we come back, I'm going to have the bed bolted in place and then we'll move on to the next step. Hi guys, so just took a little bit of a jump ahead. Be honest with you, when you're putting this bed in, sometimes there's a little bit of adjustment needed on the extrusion, the brackets, the inside corner braces, just kind of where everything lines up. On this big 40, this bed sits 20 millimeters off this extrusion. So you actually have to double check that when you do the install to make sure that everything is square. From where I left you, nothing has changed, nothing has been removed or reinstalled or changed that way. Sometimes you just have to loosen up the brackets a little bit just to kind of move the extrusions, get everything sitting perfectly square. So at this point in time, once the bed is in, you have all your bolts in place, then go ahead and tighten everything down. Past this, when we come back again, we're going to be moving on to the electronics portion. So this is going to be the end of basically full mechanical assembly on this machine. All of our belts are on, all of our gantries are in, our bed plates are in. When we come back in step 2, we're going to be moving straight forward with electronics, getting that part installed, and then we'll continue the build. So we'll see in a moment. All right, so starting in on the electronics portion. Modix does a very nice job. All the cables are pre-done, lengths are correct. Connectors and cables are shrink wrapped and very well labeled, so they're all ready to go. In part of this process, what we have to do is we actually have to set it all in the drag chains and then get ready to move that over to the machine. So you'll see I've got a couple here prepped. I'm just going to show you really quick how these drag chains come apart. I use a small flat top screwdriver, makes it a little easier. All you're simply going to do If you'll see on this side of the drag chain, there's a little levered door. You can pry under and open it up. On the other side, it's a hinge. So the drag chains will only come open one way. It's a little tedious, but it's fairly quick. Once you have your drag chains open, lay them down on your table, similar to what I have them laid here. I leave all the doors towards the top. The shorter chain is not as important. The upper chain, you have to lay the doors away from you. If you don't lay the flip open doors away from you when you put your cables in, what happens is it prevents you from doing maintenance in the Modix later, especially if you're putting the enclosure in. By doing it in this style, you'll be able to flip open the doors of your drag chain if you have to add or remove cables from it or replace anything down the road. The open doors, you'll be able to open them from within the Modix. If you put it in the other direction, you'll actually have to remove the back panel and the control box to be able to get at the drag chain. So that being said, the bag you need for this one is marked drag chain. It's got all your conical screws, your M5 T-nuts that are required. So we'll have all those just set aside and we'll use them as we need them. The easiest way to do this, as Modix has laid out on their online tutorial, is to lay your two drag chains out in this type of this layout. All you're going to do is unroll your cables from your control box. I try and keep them fairly flat going into the drag chain, but it will be impossible to keep them that way. It's just for setup at this point. So you go through the upper or the long drag chain first. Now, do not close completely the upper drag chain yet. Bring your cable around the bottom. Lay it backwards through the short drag chain so that your connectors end up almost back at the control box. Lay them out neatly so they all fit. If you are adding the secondary print head into this machine, at this point, lay the wiring in this drag chain for your secondary print head as well. If you're only doing a single head configuration, which is what we're doing in this machine, the only thing that has to go in the upper drag chain or the short drag chain are the 3 gray cables that come out of the control box. Once these are in, you can completely close the short drag chain just to keep it all out of your way. All right, so before we close up the longer drag chain, we have to add in one additional motor wire. This motor wire you will find in the bag. There's going to be a large coil of these gray wires. When you pull this wire out, you're going to look for one that is marked YM. The one marked YM is for Y-axis motor. It's going to have the duet connector on one end and the stepper motor connector on the other end. We have to make sure that we have the stepper motor connector hanging out away from the control box. The lengths on these are not extremely imperative at this point, as we will be able to move them a little bit during final setup. But what I do suggest, close a clamp on the end, close a clamp in the middle, and close a clamp in the opposite end, just so that when you're moving this around, it's not flopping all around. Once we get this moved to the machine, the Y-axis end stop is going to have to go through that large drag chain, and then we can close everything up once it's on the machine. We're going to open up our duet control box. Now, when you open this control box, be very careful because this fan is plugged in. So if you pull it off quickly, you may end up damaging the wiring on it. Just try to avoid that if at all possible. Okay. Okay. So this wiring, they've actually disconnected it for us already. So I'm going to pop these screws out. I'm going to put them inside this cover. And I'm just going to lay it aside because we're going to leave it off till we're almost at the end of the install. So the inside of your control box is going to look like this. Modix actually does a really good job of the bolts that are required to mount this are actually already pre-installed on the back of the box. So we're just simply going to pull these off and get ready to actually hang our control box on the back of our Big 40. So when we come back, I'm going to be mounting this box in the back of the machine. I'm going to show you where the drag chain is going to lay out in the back, and then we're going to move forward and getting some of our initial wiring done. All right, so we're just about to install the control box and drag link. For portions of this, you may seem like you may need 10 hands. It is possible. I'm going to do it with 2. So once you have your drag links all set up and ready to go, we will take those from here. Temporarily, we can lay our drag chain on the bed. Again, one of the reasons why I don't install the PEI sheet as early in the build as Modix recommends. So I already have the T-slots removed from the back of the control box, and I have them laid in our slots here in our extrusions. 2 on the right side, 2 on the top. And then we're just going to loosely screw them into place. If you do not have the enclosure ordered, or you're not using the enclosure for your machine, you can cinch these bolts down completely because you will not need to remove them again. Again, I'm only putting them on loosely because we do have the full enclosure kit for this machine. So the holes you're looking for is one on this side, and there's one down here right behind the switch. So when you're trying to line up for your holes on your T-nuts, you can line them up roughly. I generally do the bottom one first because it's a little harder to see. If you find it easier, which I do in most cases, I just pop this switch out. There's 2 squeeze tabs in it, one in the top, one in the bottom. Just pull it out. Don't pull on the wiring too much. You don't want to start letting go wiring on it. Once you've got it in, you can put your switch back in because then the ball end on your Allen key will be able to reach it. Okay, so our box is mounted, but it's still loose. We've still got some movement. Now, the next step of this, I'm going to move my small drag chain out of the way temporarily. I'm going to lay our larger drag chain where it should be on this rail. So you'll see as you do this, this is why we're leaving the little doors open towards the back of the machine, because again, it will make it easier for maintenance in case you have to open this drag chain up inside. So let's take one of our T-nuts. I'm going to drop it inside the slot here. We're going to grab the conical 12mm bolt, and let's just temporarily put this through the center hole on our drag chain on this end, and we are going to bolt it loosely into our T-nut that we just put in our extrusion. Now, there is a distance measurement here. From the edge of this extrusion to the front of the drag chain, you're going to be looking at about 80mm. So once you have that laid out in the proper location, you can cinch this screw down. Once that part is done, you're going to grab 3 of the M4x8 conical screws. Now, for your vision, may make this a little easier for you. I'm going to move this drag chain around a little bit, and I'm going to pull my gantry over. Again, remember, when you're moving this gantry, move it slowly. Let's get our drag chain under our gantry. Now in the top of this drag chain, there are 3 screws and there are 3 bolts in the bottom of this drag chain support bracket we've installed earlier. I grab the center one first, put it through 2 of the wires, up through the hole, and then finally into the support bracket. Now you've got your second hand freed up. You can just pull the wires as required. Now, these 3 screws, give your drag chain a little shake so that all your conical bolts center up to your holes, and you can tighten these down completely. All right. At this point, our drag chain is in place. It doesn't look pretty at this point, but we have both of our ends fixed, so we know nothing's going to be moving past that. The next step we want to do with this is grab our Y-axis end stop switch, drop it down on the forward side of your stepper motor, and it's going to lay on this bracket and zip tie it in with the rest of the drag chain as we go. Right now, all we need to do, those 3 little clips that we've put in place, we just need to push the bracket or the connector over top of our brackets. If we can't, for whatever reason, because the cable's not laying properly, this particular one, I can get it in there. But if you need to, you can just pop those 3 little doors open if you need to. So once you get it past one, you can just pull it in through the rest. Keep that on the other side of the stepper motor. The reason why I'd suggest to keep it on the forward side is because between the stepper motor and the rail, this is going to be constantly moving. So you don't want to run the risk of rubbing this cable and shorting out your end stop switch. So I run it on the other side of the motor, and then I'll just zip tie it with the rest. Now, as I'm coming down here with the end stop wire, I can start closing up these drag links. Make sure that your motor wire for your Y-axis is still exposed up here. That is going to come up over here over with a similar route to the end stop switch, and then is going to plug directly into the stepper motor. It will only go in one way, but bear in mind there are 6 tiny pins on the bottom of those stepper motors, and I'm sure most people watching this have probably dealt with stepper motors before, but I'm just going to bring special attention to it. Be very careful that that connector goes straight into the stepper motor so you don't crush or bend any of those pins. Once that's in, we can adjust the length on that cable and continue clicking closed our drag chain. Okay, so when you get to a point where you start getting to the corner, move your axes back a little more. And then these doors will close fairly easily. When you get down around here, you've got another one of your doors that you've already closed. Bring it all the way down. You don't have to pull it really tight. And then continue closing your drag chain. At this point, I will usually adjust my cables a little bit. I kind of have an idea. They're going to come down in a slope, and they're going to feed fairly neatly into this drag chain. So we can just adjust their length slightly. But given these two, I have lots of room to be able to bring these up eventually and through the back of the box and plug them into the Wi-Fi board where I'm going to need to. I am going to leave them out of the way for right now. All right, So the next step to this is, now we're going to install the drag chain up on our Y gantry. Now we've got things moved around a little bit so your view is a little better. We're going to install the upper drag chain exactly the way how we installed the lower one, with one small change. Similar in this gantry up here, we install our T-slot nut. The upper bracket for our drag chain is located up here, what's going to be above our printing head or heads. So the first part of this, we are going to grab an M5 by 8 conical bolt. So let's pick up our drag chain and we're just going to lay it in rough position for right now. I know that I still have excessive wire in here, which is fine. So I'm going to show you this from the bottom just because it'll make it a little easier to show you. So on the rear drag chain, I put the first single bolt in the middle hole on this side. On this upper gantry, you actually have to use the very lower hole. And the reason why is because the drag chain is going to hang slightly off the back of the gantry. So when you put this in, it goes in exactly the same way. Drop it in there. And then bolt it into our sliding T-nut. Once we have this done, again, it's adjustable so we can move it. I just want to double check the distance that we're going to need here. So 45 millimeters from the Y rail end. So our Y rail end is sitting right in here. So 45 millimeters is going to sit at right around the edge of the first bolt hole in your linear rail. So somewhere, it doesn't say exactly 45, it says as close as reasonable as you can get to it. That's a pretty good target at this point. While the drag chain's laid out, let's get some of this cable moving in the right direction. Try not to pull on the wiring itself. Try to pull on the gray sheath just so that you don't run the risk of pulling one of those ends off and having to go deal with that repair. What I look for when I'm doing this is so that when I zip tie this to the bracket, I can zip tie them down flat. But I'm not going to be making hard 90-degree turns and everything. There's going to be a little bit of slack left in it. We just want to make sure that this is one of the pivot points that the cables don't have to move on. All of our movement is going to be taken up in the drag chain. In the instructions, there are specific lengths that they're recommending to leave these cables hanging out past this bracket. There are measurements and you can adjust for that. I'm not going to do that at this point. I'm going to do it a little further in the install. Once we get everything solidified and kind of set up, we have all of our wiring in, then I'll start doing some of that finalization. So the last part for this drag chain is to grab our last 3 screws. Again, I start with the middle, pass the bolt through, similar, once you have the first one in, the rest are pretty easy. So again, same thing. Once our 3 bolts are in, give our drag chain a little shake, make sure it's centered up in the conical holes, and then you can tighten those down because we won't have to release them anymore. All right, everything's in, set up. At this point in time, there is another bracket that goes in here behind this that this wiring will have to feed through. It's also one of the reasons why I'm not worried about getting the finalized lengths on these correct at this point. But right now, drag chain is complete, that's in. We have our additional wiring in. When we come back, we are going to start putting one of the primary heads together. So we'll see you shortly.